Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, the home of Black Empowerment. And we're here once again, another dual stream with Beacon Network, the Pan African social media extraordinaire, and the home of African Centered News and Information. We have a great show for you all today. If you're watching, make sure you hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and the notification bell, right? Thumbs up, subscribe, notification bell. We have a great show, Deconstructing the Hamitic Curse and its meaning to African people. Brother Dwayne Omowale, as you all know, Brother Dwayne Omowale is the resident historian here at Lumumba Speaks and Beacon Network. I'll argue he's the man, the myth, the legend, your favorite historian's favorite historian. And I would say my favorite contemporary Pan-Africanist, and I would argue maybe your favorite Pan-Africanist, without further ado, Brother Dwayne, how you doing this evening? How you doing this afternoon?
Doing well, you?
I'm doing quite all right. I appreciate you asking. So let's dive right in. You're in Central Florida. We know Hurricane Milton just hit Florida. How are things in Florida right now?
Not good, to be honest. Me being in Central Florida, typically we don't get hit too bad here, but along the coast, from what I've seen, it's been very devastating in terms of flood damage, wind damage, people without power.
Right. And if people wanted to help assist in any way, shape, or form, are you aware of any organizations in which individuals could donate maybe money, supplies, manpower?
I'm not, personally, that's still something I'm trying to figure out as well. Just because the state is still recovering from the shock of the storm. So typically, what happens with hurricanes like that, it takes a few days before everything becomes streamlined, and then that's when you really start seeing these efforts come about. So actually, my plan is in the next few days just to see what I can do to support where I can in terms of the cleanup effort, because part of the issue too, in terms of what it's like recovering from these storms, it's still very dangerous to even go out in the community to really get a feel for what needs to be taken care of, because one thing that does happen is power lines get knocked down. And actually, I saw in the news there was an incident where a man accidentally stepped on a power line, and it ended up killing him. So like I said, typically it takes a few days for the situation to be properly assessed and for things to even be safe for people can actually get out in the community and really see what damages have happened and what work needs to be done. So hopefully in the coming days I could actually find organizations that are doing this work, and find ways I could contribute to that, and I'll definitely be sure to let you know once I get a feel for that.
Okay. Very
because
good.
and the other thing to keep in mind too is Florida still hasn't fully recovered from the last hurricane.
Right.
So that's the other problem.
Helen or Helena?
Yeah. So that's the problem as well, that the states still hadn't fully recovered from the last hurricane, and now this one.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Understood.
I mean, I was fortunate. We're here. Our power was only out for the night, but from what I've seen, there are parts of Central Florida where I think the power is still out.
Okay. So yeah, we know that is an issue of concern. Some of the work that we do here at Lumumba Speaks, or more so the work that we do here at Lumumba Speaks, is intellectual. We know that when we talk about the fight, the push to restore African people to our traditional greatness, part of that work is intellectual. However, we also know that a lot of the work that we do, that we must be rooted in improving the material conditions of our people. You are part of an initiative, I would even argue maybe spearheaded an initiative, at least in your local metropolitan area, regarding water filters for Togo. I've assisted in doing so. Could you tell us a bit more about the initiative, Water Filters for Togo, why it matters? We know that Pan-Africanism, and by definition and nature, is international in scope. Could you kind of give us a background on the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying I wouldn't say I spearheaded the
Okay.
effort. Actually, I would give credit to the Reverend Anthony Duxworth of the First Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. Actually, the story behind that was interesting. I gave him a copy of a book I wrote on the situation in Togo called 4 Must Go. And that book primarily was about the struggle against dictatorship in Togo. And he read the book, and the thing he was thinking was, how could the church materially assist the people of Togo? So based on that, he spoke with me, asked me about the situation with clean water in Togo, and once I informed him that access to clean water actually is a very serious problem in Togo, it was his idea to start sending water filters directly to Togo. So since earlier this year, that's been the initiative that we've been engaged in, just sending water filters over to people in Togo. Recently, they received the first shipment of those filters, and I was able to get the video for that. So it was very powerful seeing the footage of the filters being utilized in the villages in Togo.
It seemed like we had some technical difficulties there, but I think we're okay now. Can you
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes, you were freezing up a bit, but yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, I was saying about earlier this year we started the initiative of sending the water filters directly to Togo, and recently I received a video showing that the first set of filters that we sent there were received, and it was very powerful. Actually, seeing the demonstration in the video of the water filters being utilized, and how excited the people were in the village to actually see that the filters were able to purify the water. And it's one of those things that, particularly in America, we often take it for granted, just the ability to have clean drinking water. Unfortunately, that's something a lot of our people on the continent don't have. And the reality is that some of our people, even here in the States, don't have access to clean drinking water. So it's
Correct.
important that we, as you said, to keep in mind that the work we're doing as Pan-Africanists has to be, in part, work to secure the material conditions and the material needs of our people. It's something that our people are struggling with globally, but particularly on the continent. And I know it's something that you always speak about as well, based on your experiences actually going to the continent recently, the things that you saw
Right.
in Ghana. That we know about these things from an intellectual standpoint, but actually seeing these things firsthand is
Absolutely.
it changes your perspective. So I'm very grateful to be able to be part of this initiative. And last week I sent more water filters over. So even though the village received the first shipment, it's something that we're continuously doing. We're sending more filters over there.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So now we're going to take a shift and do a deep dive into, of course, the meat of the conversation this afternoon. Uh, I would argue you, as I take the position of Malcolm X, the late great Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, in terms of leaving one's religion at the door, right, when addressing issues that African people face. Malcolm, of course, famously stated that we are not oppressed due to our religion or religious beliefs. However, I saw, and I joked with you and stated that you were being divisive in a jocular fashion. But you made a post on social media regarding the Hamitic Curse. Why did you choose to do that?
So my reasoning for doing that actually came out of a post I made regarding Arab imperialism in Africa, and I was a bit surprised at the negative pushback the post received, particularly from people who are Pan-Africanists. But one of the things that came up in that discussion was this idea that racism against African people was the creation of European colonialism.
Right.
So I made the point that no, when we look at Arab societies, when we look at Western Asian or Middle Eastern societies, we do find racism existing in those societies prior to the European enslavement of African people. And one of the examples that I gave to demonstrate this was the concept of the curse of Ham. And I pointed out that this concept was something that had become twisted. When you read the original story, the original story isn't meant to portray an actual curse against African people. But at some point, that the interpretation of the story became twisted, and it became something that was very deliberately racist against African people. So I put that post up there based on the conversations I had around this topic to show that racism against African people certainly did predate the European enslavement of African people, but to also point out that certain interpretations of the Abrahamic religions have also played a role in racism against African people, which is the argument I made in the post is why so much of the racism against African people emerged out of Islamic Arab society and Christian European societies. That in both situations we do see this concept of a curse of Ham actually playing a role in playing a role in justifying the racism against African people.
Yes, absolutely. And could you be more specific? I know you're referring to the Jewish Talmud,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So here's the thing that the Babylonian Talmud actually is was really, from the research I did, the first example I've seen connecting the curse of Ham to race. In the Talmud, it actually mentions that the curse was placed upon Ham, and it
Right,
changed Ham's physical features, and it caused the Ham's descendants to change their physical features as well. Now, in the original story in Genesis, there's no mention. Well, first of all, in the original story, the curse isn't on Ham; it's not on Ham's descendants. The curse is specifically on Ham's son Canaan.
right.
And also in the story, there's no association between the curse and physical features. At no point in the story is it mentioned that Canaan turns black because of the curse. At no point in the story is it even mentioned that Ham or any of Ham descendants are actually black. I think eventually the way the story is told, because in the original narrative of the story, what it's conveying is that all of the world's population are descendants of Noah's son. So in the original story, the implication is that Ham's descendants were Africans, because among his sons included Cush, which is a reference to the historical African kingdom of Cush. Mizraim, which is the Hebrew term for Egypt, was mentioned as one of Ham's sons as well. So I think because of the way the narrative is written, and the implication being that Ham is the progenitor of the African race, that the story was eventually taken to mean that Ham is himself supposed to be representative of African people, of black people. But we know that's Hebrew mythology; it's not actual African history.
History.
But I think because of the mythology behind it, the assumption was that Ham is supposed to represent African people. But like I said, the original story makes no mention of race or skin color whatsoever. So from my research, the first reference connecting that curse to any type of skin color was, as you mentioned, the Talmud, which it mentions that as part of the curse, Ham's physical features changed, and also cursed his descendants to have black skin.
Absolutely. And just for those of us, some may be questioning, right, the validity of the claims that you're making. I actually have a copy of the Talmud right here, right? So once again, this isn't conjecture or innuendo. In fact, when we a good example of this, and Dr. James Sweet talks about this in his article, is that the story of Ham has functioned to justify it. I could bring this up. I could share the screen here so you all can see what we're talking about here. Give me 1 second. Yes. The story of Ham has functioned to justify the subjection and degradation of blacks for over 1,000 years. Interpretations of the curse of Ham can be found in the Babylonian Talmud, a collection of Jewish oral traditions that first appeared in the 5th century. Despite the absence of any characterization of Canaan's children according to color, race, or ethnicity in the biblical version, in Genesis, whereby the ethnic identification of the sons of Ham had begun to shift toward the peoples of African descent. Noah says to Ham, "You prevented me from doing that which is done in dark. Accordingly, your seed will be ugly and black." The 18th century Tanhuma version gives the story as follows. As for Ham, because he saw with his eyes the nakedness of his father, his eyes became red, and because he spoke with his mouth, his lips became crooked, and because he turned his face, the hair of his head and his beard became singed, and because he did not cover his father's nakedness. He went naked, and his prepuce became stretched. All this because of all of God's retributions are consummate to a transgression. Although the passage makes no reference to slavery or blackness, it presents a number of the negative stereotypes that were later applied to African slaves. Deformed lips, crinkled hair, and elongated penises. Even though rabbinic interpretation never explicitly associated Africans with the sons of Ham, they certainly suggested future racial imagery. So, just of course, just let people know that we're operating from a scholarly frame of reference. And Alex, I see you in the chat. We're going to bring you in to the conversation momentarily if you can hold off for just a minute. So just something to consider when we're discussing this conversation, that this is not based on innuendo or conjecture. The second issue, of course, is that we must understand that Hebrew or Jewish mythology is not consumerate, right? It's not African history. So that's just one thing to consider. And mythology of any kind is not history. So just want to be, of course, aware of that. So now we're going to get into a little deeper question. Why do Black people believe that they are the original Hebrews?
So the history behind that is interesting. Obviously, we know because of the history of slavery and the slave masters being Christians, they typically intended to impose their religion on the enslaved African people. So what ended up happening for African people on the slave plantations, and this is the case both in the United States and in the Caribbean, that being introduced to the Christian religion, being introduced to Hebrew mythology and the stories in the Bible, African people naturally had an affinity towards the Hebrew people of the Bible because our ancestors, looking at the stories in the Bible, connected to the story of the people who were enslaved in a foreign land. People who were away from their homelands and enslaved in a strange land. So this was something that our people connected to emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Now, I'd make the argument that initially, when African people were making this connection, it wasn't because their ancestors literally believed that they were the Hebrew Israelites themselves. It was more so a connection of just recognizing certain parallels and certain similarities between the conditions of African people on slave plantations and the conditions of the people who are mentioned in the Bible. Now, eventually, what ended up developing was an actual Hebrew Israelite movement among people of African descent who actually really came to believe that they were God's chosen people, that they were the Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. And again, this connection came out of the fact that so much of their situation paralleled with the situation of the Hebrew people. But I would argue that really why this movement actually suggesting that we are the real Hebrew Israelites emerged is it came out of an ignorance of actual African history. It came out of the fact that because of the history of slavery, many of our ancestors were disconnected from actual African history, so they sought to connect themselves to the narratives of the Hebrew Israelites in the Bible. And I would also argue that a lot of it just comes out of a very anti-African worldview. That everything that our ancestors were told about Africa, and many of the things that we were told about Africa, is very negative. Africa is always portrayed as the dark continent. The historical narrative of Africa is that it's a narrative in which we were a very backwards, uncivilized, savage people until Europeans came and civilized us through Christianity. The unfortunate reality of that is many Africans actually internalized that, and many Africans actually believed that our ancestors were heathens or they were uncivilized,
Right.
and those sort of negative connotations. So what we find with the Hebrew Israelites is that they internalized these concepts so much that they really believe that it's better for them to identify with the Hebrew Israelites because at least the Hebrew Israelites are God's chosen people.
Right.
So they're not savages and the type of negative things that we are accustomed to associating Africa with. Now, the irony of it is when you actually read that story, the Hebrew Israelites are the furthest thing from what we would think about as a divinely chosen people. But
Right.
that's another argument as well. That I think a lot of people who are the Hebrew Israelites don't actually even really study or read the biblical scripture. They're just trying to connect with this concept of being a chosen people, of being a divinely ordained people. And like I said, the reason why I think they do so is because of this very negative view towards Africa.
Right. Absolutely. I see you, D1. We're gonna bring you in momentarily, as well as Alex. We're gonna bring you in as well. Um, Eric Williams. Eric Williams, who wrote the seminal text "Capitalism and Slavery." And as you all know, family, here at the LL, the Lumumba Library, we're always keeping the literature on deck. So this is an actual copy of Eric Williams' book "Capitalism and Slavery." I read it over a decade ago. Eric Williams has made an argument in his seminal text that the academy typically accepts, and that is that slavery was not born of racism, rather, it was a consequence of slavery. However, myself, you, and Dr. Of course, Sweet would beg to differ. Why is that?
So it's a very complicated topic, and the reason why I say it's complicated is because Frank Snowden, I think he has done great work on this topic. For those who aren't familiar with Frank Snowden, a lot of his scholarship was around how race was viewed in Greco-Roman civilization, and the argument that he put forward is that in Greco-Roman civilization, there wasn't racism as we know it. That the Greeks, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans didn't have a negative connotation or a negative association with black skin. And Snowden points out, particularly the Greeks wrote very very favorably about of African people. References to the Ethiopians being the blameless Ethiopians, references to Ethiopians being the most favored among the gods. So then when we look at early Western civilization, there really isn't that level of racism towards African people. So then the question becomes, well, where does this racism come from? And Eric Williams, and certainly Eric Williams is not the only one to make the argument, but the argument he put forward is that this racism comes out of the enslavement of African people. But as we know, there's quite a bit of history between
Yes.
Roman civilization and the European enslavement of African people. And James, Sweet, the article that you mentioned, I think it's a very I often reference that article when talking about the origins of racism because James Sweet's argument is that racism in Western societies were actually introduced via racism from Arab societies,
Right.
particularly during the Moorish conquest of Spain. And the argument he put forward in that article is that racism in Arab societies developed not only due to the Arab enslavement of African people and the Arab conquest of African people, but also, as we pointed out before, the religious justification rooted in the concept of the curse of Ham. So the article points out that racism within Arab societies had numerous different sources, and ultimately what he argues is that it was through contact with Arab civilization that racism really develops in Western civilization. But a point that Watarani mentioned in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is that when we look at the history of anti-Semitism in European society, and how violent and vicious anti-Semitism was, that Watarani's argument was there was already a culture or a tradition of intolerance towards other groups of people in Europe. So that Watarani's argument is that he takes a similar position to Eric Williams, that primarily racism in Western society comes out of the enslavement of African people. But he makes that point in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa to show that within European culture, there was already a tendency towards intolerance of other groups of people, which he felt also played a role in why Europeans developed racist views that they had towards African people.
Understood. So here's the $1,000,000 question, right? And we're going to lean on your expertise as the resident historian. You've written nearly 30 books on the history of African people on the continent throughout the diaspora. Is the Hamitic Curse real?
No, I mean, as I pointed out before, when you read the actual biblical story, it's very much different than what we typically think of the Hamitic Curse. Because as I pointed out, in the original story, first of all, the curse wasn't placed on Ham. It was placed on Ham's son, and it wasn't even placed on all of Ham's descendants. And as I pointed out as well, there's no connection between that curse and skin color. So in the original story, it's not stated that Ham nor his descendants became black because of a particular curse. So as I pointed out before, in my view, that's just a twisted interpretation of the original biblical story. But
right now, you talk about the Hebrew Israelites, and I've of course had my fair share of run-ins with the Hebrew Israelites. I've shared before on this platform that my brother is a Hebrew Israelite, my big brother. One of the arguments that they make, and I've actually read scholarly literature on Hebrew Israelites, they believe that
start to break up again there.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I just changed my internet source. So in conversations with Hebrew Israelites, they would put forth a narrative that the reason why Black people were enslaved here in the West is because we disobeyed God, and the enslavement of African people was punishment. What do you say to
that? There's a lot I could say to that, but I think my biggest problem with that is that not the same argument that the slave masters would make? That there's some kind of divine, religious justification for why Africa was enslaved. And I mean, again, that goes back to the whole situation with the Hamitic Curse. One of the reasons why that was utilized both by Arabs who enslaved African people and Europeans is because it gives a sort of divine justification for the enslavement of African people. That, well, you have to be enslaved because at some point in your history you committed a sin and you were cursed by Noah, or you were cursed by God, and that typically was one of the justifications both among Arabs and Europeans for enslaving African people. This idea that we're not religious people, this idea that we're heathens, we're pagans, we're a godless people. So that's one of the issues I have with that, is that it's the same justification that slave masters have used. And the other issue with that is it's very self-defeating, because if you take the position that we're in the situation we're in because God has ordained that we must be in the situation, what then do you do about that?
Right. That must be a fatalistic. Right. Yeah. How do you solve the problem? And they would argue that they have to simply live by God's laws and commandments, and then God will liberate them. So it actually takes away the ability for someone to engage, have agency, and of course be self-determining. So that in itself would be problematic. But absolutely. So why does this matter in 2024?
I mean, it matters because we have a lot of these issues that we're still dealing with as a people. Obviously, when we talk about Hebrew Israelites, there are a movement of African people who still believe that they're the historic people of the Bible. They're the Hebrew Israelites of the Bible, and they completely reject an African identity. And when you asked the question before, I pointed out that initially that connection was among African people who were enslaved in the diaspora. Unfortunately, it's spreading to the continent. There are people on the continent who actually believe they're Hebrew Israelites as well. And something that was brought to my attention a few years ago, there was a brother out of Togo who actually tried to get citizenship in Israel, claiming that the Togolese are a lost tribe of Israel. So we even find this thing on the continent, where our people on the continent are starting to believe that they're the real Hebrew Israelites. They're the lost children of Israel. And it's a problem psychologically for people. It's a problem, politically for people. And it's not just the Hebrew Israelites. Even just generally, the way a lot of our people think about religion. Again, it goes back to the point that if you believe that your conditions are ordained by God, it's not going to give you the agency to do anything about your condition. And unfortunately, a lot of our people have this approach to religion where we think that if we just sit down and pray about it, it's going to make things happen. And again, I always go back to, if you're religious, you really actually need to read your holy books, because again, using the Hebrew Israelites as an example in the Bible, at no point did God, even though they were God's chosen people, at no point did God come down and fight their battles for them. The Hebrew Israelites had to do everything for themselves. They had to physically get up and leave Egypt. They had to physically wage the wars that they waged to acquire land in Israel. So unfortunately, a lot of our religious brothers and sisters really have this type of view where if we just sit down and pray, God will come down and present all the solutions for us. And it just creates a situation where then people who are religious are not as proactive in changing their conditions as they need to be, because they have this idea that all of this is ordained by God anyways, and we have little say over it. So and I think we've spoken before on this platform about Black liberation theology, and that's rooted in this idea that we need to do the work ourselves. That African people really need to engage in the type of work that's going to lead to our liberation. We can't sit down and wait for God to do it. And that typically, that's why people who preach liberation theology and have that particular religious understanding tend to be much more proactive in fighting for the issues affecting African people than people who have a more passive approach to religion. So I would say that's why it's still important, because these religious concepts and the ideas still impact how African people think about ourselves, how we think about our history, and how we go about actually trying to address the issues that confront our people.
Very good, very good. So family, what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the conversation. But before we do so, if you're watching, of course, I'm here, Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. Here, of course, with Beacon Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, in the home of African-centered news and information. We're having a great conversation with the resident historian here at Lumumba Speaks and Beacon Network, Dwayne Omowale, the author of nearly 30 books on the history of African people on the continent and in the diaspora. And we're discussing deconstructing the Hamitic Curse and its meaning for African people with Brother Dwayne, of course, Omowale. Before we open things up, I want to make sure we go over some of the ground rules here at Lumumba Speaks and Beacon Network. First and foremost, diversity of thought is welcome. Diversity of thought is welcome, irrespective if you're on the left, right down the middle, or on the right. You could be a nationalist, a pan-Africanist, integrationist, or even a conservative. You are welcome here. No racial epithets, no racial epithets of any kind. As you all know, this is a site of Black empowerment. We believe in the three N's of Black power, which are self-respect, self-defense, and of course self-determination. So we're going to respect ourselves as Black people, respect ourselves as African people, and we're not going to allow epithets of any kind. Number three, facts over feelings, family. So we want to make sure that if you disagree with someone, you attack the argument that they're making, not the person. No ad hominems. Number four, no fundamentally false statements. This, of course, is my platform, and I'm responsible for the information that is disseminated on my platform. So we want to make sure that when we're having conversations that are rooted in facts and rooted in claims that can be reputable from, of course, reputable sources, right? That could be verifiable from reputable sources. And last but not least, our mission here is neither to exonerate or vilify, but to challenge conventional wisdom and re-examine what has previously been accepted as fact. So with that said, family, the link is now in the chat. If you want to engage myself with Brother Dwayne regarding this conversation, you're more than welcome to do so. I know Brother Chris Jones, D1 Beats, Alex, I think you all wanted to tap in and be part of the conversation. You're more than welcome to do so. Once again, the link is in the chat. The link is in the chat. You can tap in and be part of the conversation. Once again, if you're watching, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Hit the notification bell as well for future videos. You're watching LumumbaSpeaks.com and, of course, the Equaline Network. And we're having a conversation regarding deconstructing the Hamitic Curse and its meaning for African people with Brother Dwayne Omowale. Yeah, I think one of the points you made, Brother Dwayne, and we discussed this before when we did the show on the African Centered Critique of Abrahamic Religions, is the role that Abrahamic religions play in identity dysphoria amongst African people. You can make the argument that religions promote a belief, and there is literature to substantiate this, that individuals who are right from a region of the world where we can argue that these Abrahamic religions developed are considered to be closer to God than people who were not, particularly African people, right? And so we see that play a role in terms of not only this concept of God having a chosen people, we see this in the Islamic religion in terms of when one dies, everyone will speak Arabic when they go to heaven. Arabic is the language of God. But also this belief that when African people actually convert to these religions, they oftentimes have to engage in a form of cultural conversion as well. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, and it's very fascinating, particularly when we talk about Christianity and Islam, because where those two religions distinguish themselves from Judaism is that these are supposed to be universal religions, whereas Judaism is about a chosen people having a connection to God. Anybody in theory could be a Christian. Anybody in theory could be a Muslim. These are supposed to be universal religions for all of humanity.
Right.
But the problem with these religions, and as you alluded to, that typically Christianity has been associated with European culture due to the legacy of European colonialism in Africa. Same thing with Islam. Islam has been very closely associated with Arab culture and the Arab identity due to the history of Arab imperialism and colonialism in Africa. So we do have this problem with these religions, that even though these religions present themselves as universal religions, they're often utilized to justify racism against African people and utilized to impose a type of cultural superiority and cultural dominance of African people. And what's particularly ironic to me about the fact that these religions are utilized in this manner is that when Christianity began to spread in Europe, the reaction from the Roman Empire was a very violent one. The reaction was actually to suppress Christianity, to suppress Christians, to the point where many Christians were actually going to Africa to find refuge and safety in Africa. The same is true of Islam. Initially, Arabs were very hostile towards Islam, to the point where Muhammad had to send his followers to Ethiopia for safety. So typically what we find with these religions is that even though African people, according to some of the believers of these religions who use religions to enslave African people, even though we're supposed to be an uncivilized, savage people because we didn't have a proper conception of God, the
Right.
conception of God they had, the fact is our civilizations were actually very very opening, very hospitable, very welcoming to the early practitioners of these religions, which is why these religions even were able to gain traction in Africa and begin spreading in Africa. So I find it interesting that Christians, particularly the Roman Empire, was trying to essentially destroy Christianity. Arabs were trying to destroy Islam, and it's in Africa where these religions, initially found refuge and safety before they spread and became global religions. So it's almost a situation where initially Africans were better Christians than Europeans, and we were better Muslims than Arabs. And John Henry Clark always made the point that now the Pope, and now Muhammad. So that's a problem as well, that these religions have been used to impose the type of cultural dominance and the type of cultural imperialism on African people. And the reality is that in terms of practicing the values of these religions in African cultures and African societies, we had these values and these morals even before these religions were
created. Very good. Alex, I see that you're in queue. I'm going to need you to camera while you're in queue to verify that you're not trolling. Okay, very good. All right, so yeah, and you can turn your camera off and then we can bring you in, or you can leave it on. All right, very good. Alex, what say you?
All right. Hey, good morning, guys. Can you hear me?
We hear you just fine.
Excellent. Good day to you guys. Hey, this is I was just I subscribed to your channel a while back recently, and as I was scrolling through, and then I saw this, and I just piped in. Very interesting topic, Brother Omowale. Are you a PhD? I want to make sure I address you with respect according to your title. If you're a doctor by any means, at least put that to your name and all of that. But good research, good stuff. But like I said in some of the comments that I put in, this is new to me in the sense of looking into history, looking into religious aspect, economic aspects, and all those things that we all those various subject areas or areas of activities, as Dr. Chris Wilson talks about those things. But I put in the chat which Bible, because you mentioned the Bible a lot, Brother Omowale. Which Bible did you look into? Which books? Because what I'm finding out for myself is that there were so many books that were somewhat hidden. Yeah.
You're talking about the Council of Nicaea, where they decided what books would be in the Bible, what books would not.
Yeah, that canonization, exactly. That's a very trite. When people think about the Bible, that's what they think of, but that is not the. I don't even let me just say this in seconds. In Second Ezra, which is one of the books that were hidden, it talks about how Moses wrote over 8 books that were.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up on us a little bit, brother. And we want to hear what you're saying. I don't know if that maybe it's your device, but I just want to let you know that you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me better now? Or
yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. But let me just say this quickly. There are so many other books that are not part of that canonization that you said, Dr. Bakari. So as we know, then if we are going to proceed with that as truth, therefore we can quote from some other books that talk about there were many other books that are hidden. So I have yet to see any Hebrew Israelite, any historian for that matter, talk about what do you do with passages from the ancient texts that talk about these other books that will be revealed to us. And there are no numbers put in it. What do we do with that? Which is why my question is, what Bible are you referring to when you mention?
Well, I think that's a good point. There have been some scholars who have highlighted that. But the issue is that we have to center in the conversation is irrespective of which books we're reading, it's mythology. It's not actual Africa. It's not actual history. And so that's the issue that you have to understand, that the Bible, and there are some historical aspects, but overall the narrative in the Bible regarding Jewish people or Hebrew people is mythological. It's not actual. It's not something that is actual history.
Oh, that's new to me. Well, I think that's new to a lot of us, Dr. Bakari, because you can study. There are geographic historians. There are, so many tests.
And what we find is that they've even verified that, hey, these stories are mythological. Jewish scholars have come out and even said that Abraham is a mythological figure. There's a great book written by Jewish scholars, The Bible Unearthed, that goes into this, right? We could talk about, there being no historical, archaeological, or anthropological evidence to substantiate the story of Hebrew enslavement in ancient Egypt. right? I mean, so there, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, this is something, and I can speak to this, but Dwayne can speak to this as well. But I was lucky enough to minor in religion when I went to college, and I mean, for example, the story of the Garden of Eden. We all know that humanity began in Africa, but the story of the Garden of Eden is a Mesopotamian mythological story that places the origins of humanity in present-day Iraq. We know that's not something that is historically accurate, right? So it's mythology.
Well, you said a lot, Dr. Bakari. You said a lot. However, all those things.
I could give another example of, in the Abrahamic religions, the belief is that Abraham was the first person to practice monotheism. We know that is something that is adverse to the facts. At least historically, we know it was actually Pharaoh Akhenaten. Right. So once again, and that's one of the issues is that when people don't know history, and we know there are a number of reasons why that is the case. What we then find is that people will accept, the narratives and Abraham and different religions as something that is historically accurate when they actually are
not. I mean, everything you've said can be substantiated by books that you've read that you perhaps agree with, right? And the same thing I can say, I can bring other books and other historians and other narrators who talk about that it is not a myth. That, as a matter of fact,
very quickly, it's not something I agree with, or disagree with. I just look at claims that could be substantiated.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying.
So, for example, if I could, and then I will let you provide a retort. The Bible dates the origins of humanity around, I think, and you could fact check me on this if I get the date wrong, around 4200 BCE, right? The Bible dates this, right? However, we know what the human beings have been living on the planet Earth for much longer than that. In fact, we find that the ancient Egyptian civilizations, ancient Kemet, their civilization goes back thousands of years before that. We know that ancient Kemet existed thousands of years before the Bible even came into fruition, before there was a story of Abraham, and Adam and Eve, so on and so forth, right? For another example would be the story of the Great Flood in the Bible, right? The Babylonian tale of the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the Bible by at least 1,000 years. And then that Babylonian narrative, there's a story of a great flood. I mean, these are just historical facts that could be verified.
Okay. I'm waiting for you to complete. Are you?
I'm done.
Okay. Well, it's the idea that books are important. Just like you and I, you mentioned various aspects of history, points in time that can be substantiated by books, right? So
no, not substantiated by books, substantiated by actual history. So we're talking. So there's a book is a secondary source. We're talking about primary sources. So, for example, I could read a book about the Rosetta Stone, right, and how the Rosetta Stone was used to be able to interpret hieroglyphics. But the Rosetta Stone is the primary source. You can actually go to wherever the Rosetta Stone is.
We agree on that. I mean,
right. So there's a difference there. But I mean, for example, the story of the Tower of Babel, right? The argument was that God was displeased with humanity for wanting to build a skyscraper to the heavens. And so as a result, he caused the people to speak different languages. And this is why we have different languages and people dispersed throughout the world. This is a great mythological story. But the reality is, during the time that the Tower of Babel allegedly was being built, the Great Pyramid in Giza in ancient Kemet was already standing and was the world's tallest building for nearly 4,000 years. So once again, we also see the omission of African history in the biblical text, in Abrahamic religious text. So that's why I said, it's if you actually study history from on a global plane, you would find that the claims that they're making are adverse to the facts.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the idea of books and all of that. What I mean by books is the what we get as the visual or the textual representation of those various murals and writings and in history, right? So that's what I think we agree. I think we're saying the same thing when it comes to when I say books. It's just we're saying, okay, this is a historian that have done a research and they took some pictures of this of these hieroglyphics and murals and interpretations of writings, and then they put down what they saw and yada yada yada. That's what you and I, that's what we all study. That's what we all rely, based on knowledge on.
Well,
The
it
fact
goes it goes a little deeper than that. You have to actually critique the work. You have to look at the
Well,
methodological
that's
approach.
the analysis, but it still
Right.
goes into text. It still goes into what we call a book. Today
Well, I
we have
mean,
video.
and then you have to look at it. Was it peer reviewed? I mean, a lot of people write
I
books.
understand.
Right?
I mean,
So,
we're not.
I mean,
We're not.
because I don't want to just simplify, right, the situation, because people write books that are reputable. People write books that are
But
not
absolutely,
reputable.
absolutely, absolutely. But at the end of the day, that still does not make it a book that is reputable, that's peer reviewed. That's it's still a book, right? It's still a book. Do we agree on that, or you
Yes,
saying
but
that?
but that is the best that we can do in terms of being able to have a source of information that that stands the test of scrutiny, right? I
Okay.
mean, we've had people write books stating that the transatlantic slave trade happened in reverse, right? So once
Well, I mean,
again, yeah.
that we don't want to spend our time debating those things that we can clearly see that are false or just doesn't stand scrutiny. But one thing I want to say about books, I just recently found out about the Trans-Pacific slave trade. Do you guys know about that?
Now, when you say Trans-Pacific, are you referring to uh, the trans Indian, or are you talking? I'm trying to get an understanding of what you're referring to by Trans-Pacific.
Good. Thank you. So what I mean by Trans-Pacific is the fact that in one of the books in the Bible, which is why I asked earlier about which books of the Bible has Brother Omowale researched. It's that in one of the books it talks about how the 10 tribes would actually travel outside of Northeast Africa, which you mentioned Iraq, which I did not refute that. I did not get a chance to speak about that. I don't subscribe to the Iraqian and all of that. It's all Northeast Africa. It's all African history that we're talking about here.
It's not. It's not. It's not. It's not African history.
So the cradle of civilization is not African history?
Well, actually, when we study anthropology, what we find is that the three ancient civilizations, three civilizations of antiquity, the Indus Valley, and of course India, what's now present-day India, Pakistan, the Fertile Crescent, also known as Mesopotamia, and present-day Iraq, and even the Nile Valley civilization and what is now known as Egypt or ancient Kemet, those civilizations developed independent of each other.
I understand. I understand that. But is Iraq, is what we call the Middle East, is that not Northeast Africa? Is that not part of Africa?
No, Iraq is not Northeast Africa. And
well, I mean, is that not
hold on. You asked a question, and as someone who's lucky enough to have study these issues, there's never been a time in history in which the area of the world that is now known and called Iraq was considered part of the African continent. And we're talking about from antiquity to today.
So the creation of the Suez Canal, which gives us the separation of between Africa and what we call the Middle East. So
in Asia, yes, Southwest Asia, yes.
Right, Southwest Asia. So you're saying that doesn't have any bearing?
I'm speaking specifically to the area that is presently known as the nation state of Iraq.
Okay. The area. Okay. Well, bottom line is the point I'm trying to make is that the Garden of Eden. For those who subscribe to that narrative, it sounds like you don't. And or perhaps if you do, let me know. But based on what you've told me here, all of that history, which is particularly in the Bible, but it has to be which books you're reading, because just reading Genesis doesn't bear witness, which is why I asked earlier, what books are we reading? Are we just reading the Canaanite?
Let me ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
Because all cultures have creation stories about how the world and humanity came into being. That is reality.
Right, and some steal from each other.
Could you tell me are you knowledgeable of an African creation story?
There are plenty of them.
Could you tell me one? And what
sure. For example, I grew up in Haiti. I grew up in Haiti. The brothers there who practice some of the African spiritualist religion, they talk about the creator God who came in, in the voodoo religion, for example.
Yes.
Right. They talk about the expression of God in various aspects in his creation, coming in as an animal, particularly expressing himself as the sun, but coming in as a snake, various, what we would may categorize as mysticism or mythology, but, that's their history. That's their version of history.
Well, no, I mean, it's still mythology. It's not history. It's just mythology. It doesn't matter if it's African, if it's Indian, if it's Hebrew. It's still mythology.
It's still mythology. I guess when I hear the word mythology, it's if we use that to dismiss stories, to dismiss what can be substantiated and via books, via once again, what's expressed to us, history expressed to us via some sort of codified writing, right? What I'm calling a book of some sort. Then it doesn't. It's just not. We just can't say that's mythology to dismiss something that can be substantiated. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I'm calling it mythology because these things aren't able to be substantiated. That's why, in part, it's mythology.
Well,
because these aren't things that are able to be substantiated.
So you're saying the fact that you mentioned Abraham was the first one who practiced monotheism. That's the thing. I don't want to go back and forth on examples. That's why I say what books have we read? Because one of the things that I find is Abraham was never called to create a religion. So hold on, wait. Well,
no one ever said that.
I'm just saying that. I didn't say
per the religious text, the argument is made that Abraham is the father of monotheism, hence the term Abrahamic religions. Right?
Yeah, but that's what people say.
Hold on. Based on actual world history, we know that is not the case. Something else that can be substantiated, right? When we talk about the Bible and the story, the mythology of the creation of the world, Hinduism is the world's oldest religion. Hinduism was around long before the stories in the Bible were even created. So once again, these are things that can be substantiated.
Well,
so once again, just because, and this is something that Dr. Anthony T. Browder talks about in his book, Now About the Contributions to Civilization, that European scholars, now we're talking about the writing of history here, which of course is historiography, when they would write history, they would purposely omit African contributions to civilization. And because those African contributions historically contradicted the narrative that were in the Bible.
I would not argue with you on that. Just as in the same way I can say the African Hebrew stories contradict many of the European narrative and interpretation that were given.
So here's the thing. These aren't African Hebrew stories. For example, if you have had the chance to study classical and even medieval and contemporary African religions, they differ and pale greatly from what the Hebrew or Jewish and Abrahamic religions. These aren't, and that's one of the issues that why we're having the show is because there's the misnomer that these religions or the people in the Bible are Black people. We know based on the detailed imagery that our ancient Kemetan, ancient Egyptian ancestors provided of people from that area region of the world, that they did not look in a manner that what we would call Black.
What did they look like?
They were fair-skinned.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and we know this because the ancient Egyptians provided detailed physical representations of the people they came in contact with.
And these are from the murals that were whitewashed from the.
These are from the murals in ancient Egypt.
But these are
Not-
from the
these
whitewashed
are-
that were changed, that were brown,
no, they were not whitewashed. No,
that were changed to be brown. Are you sure about
no.
that?
Yes, I am very sure.
Well, I have text. I have proof on that. It's all over. It's all over. I don't want to say all over the internet, but it can be. You can look at it all in the libraries. That these murals, these texts, those stories have been changed. They've been tampered with.
Well, so my question is, the people who whitewash these texts, why would they whitewash it in a way where the Egyptians and the Nubians are still black, but the Asians are brown or pale?
Well, that's a secondary question. The primary question is, the people there are
whitewash. I mean, who if someone is whitewashing, why wouldn't they whitewash everything to be white? Why would they only whitewash the Asiatics but keep the Nubians and Egyptians as black?
They could only go so far, because what we know in history is that there were areas and regions and because of time, it's like the thief doesn't have time to steal everything when they come in your house. They might, they start stealing by the time they hear a key, jiggling on the door or something. They head out the back door. You know what I mean? So I don't want to speculate, but as to why they didn't, it's just they couldn't.
But no, but brother.
But you said they did, though.
You are speculating. That's the issue. And once again,
I'm not speculating.
Very quickly. And I hate to just kind of put this out here. I have a master's degree in African studies. I've studied African history from antiquity to the modern era. And I'm telling you, matter of factly, as an academic, as a scholar, that the stories in the Bible are not historically accurate. This is not African history. I know this is the narrative that we've been socialized to believe based on our forced conversion to Christianity and oftentimes Islam, but this is not something that is African history. It's not.
Well, I hold 2 master's degrees as well, but I do want to.
No. In what? In what field?
In what? I have a master's degree in business, and I have a master's degree in research. Okay. And
hold on. Once again, having a master's degree in business has nothing to do with studying African history.
Yeah, but okay. Well, let's get this.
No, wait, hold on. Is that true? Is that true or false?
It is true that you have specific areas of research, but people err. Just as some of the things that you've said, there were errors in some of those things that you've said. But I'm not going to go line by line. But that's why I want to go back to the books.
You need to make me aware of where did I error, or where did we error in the claims that we made regarding African history.
Well, the claims that you're making, I don't mind you making claims about other areas of history, but the claims in terms of the Bible, what I find is when people are speaking about the Bible, they don't even look at other books. They stop with the European canonization.
Hold on. You're talking like Bone Thugs and Harmony. It's quite all right. I asked you a very specific question. I said, in what manner did myself or Brother Dwayne Omowale error in the statements that we made about African history?
Okay, in the area of books, because when you speak of books,
African history, what did we say about African history that is farcical?
Okay, well, when you refer to the Bible and stories outside of the Bible, many of what you said were not accurate because
what stories? What stories did I refer to in terms of African history that were inaccurate?
Stories about African history. That's not my.
Okay, because hold on, I listen very well. Even though I talk a lot, I listen very well.
No. Hold
on, brother. You can't overtalk me on my platform. You stated, but I'm gonna quote you verbatim, that we made claims about African history that was inaccurate. This is what you said.
No, I didn't say African history. I said about history. The Bible.
Brother, you can't overtalk me on my platform. You said African history. Brother Dwayne, did he say African history?
Yeah, I mean,
said,
that's the topic.
you said African history. And so I'm respectfully asking you, could you provide us an example, myself or Brother Dwayne, in which we made a claim about African history that was inaccurate? That's all I'm asking. African history.
No, I said the Bible.
No, but
Books,
brother, but my brother, you said African history. You're now moving the goalposts. Now, if you want to retract that statement, you're more than welcome to do so. And the reason why I'm gonna say that is because I've come on my platform and I've made a claim that was false. And the very next show, I said, hey, before we get started, I want to retract the statement I made. I did some more research and found out I misspoke. Right. So this isn't a situation where this is like an aha moment, because I do this myself on my own platform. Like, you know what, family, I misspoke. That was not the case. This is what actually transpired. And I want to make sure I'm not promoting misinformation. Right. So this is, once again, this is not an aha. This is not an I got you moment or situation, because even on my own platform, I correct myself when I make a statement or claim that is false. There's oftentimes, in times I would even, give the floor to Brother Dwayne and say, you know what, Brother Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong on this situation. Right. So this is not an aha type of situation. That's not what we do here. Just want to make that.
Okay, well, African history is also Hebrew history, and Hebrew history is gotten from.
No. So one of the core principles here at Lumumba Speaks and Be Quiet Network is that I do not allow people to promote false information, because this is my platform. I am an academic, and I'm responsible for the information that's disseminated on my platform. That is 100% false. Hebrew history is not African history. I cannot allow you to make that claim because it is false.
So you
on my platform, I can't allow you to do that.
The Hebrew people did not originate from Africa?
No, actually, according to the biblical text, the Hebrew people originated from Abraham. Abraham was from the city-state of Ur, which is located in present-day Iraq. So no.
But which is why I mentioned the Suez Canal earlier. All those areas.
Sir, we're not talking about the Suez Canal. We're talking about the landmass that is now presently known as the nation-state of Iraq. Iraq, the city-state of Ur, is located in what is presently known as Iraq. People from the city-state of Ur, the city-state of Ur, also the ethnic group of people from the city-state of Ur, they were Akkadians. Akkadians were not Africans. So that is not the case.
Okay. I guess
there's no way around this.
Well, I mean, do you believe that the children of Noah were black?
Well, first off, I don't do anything based off belief, right? I'm not, because when you believe.
Well, okay. Well, what do you say about the history that you've researched? I'm
sorry, go right ahead.
But what does the history that you've researched say were the skin tone, the skin color of the children of Noah, as to in the table of nations, what's referred to that as the table of nation in the Hebrew text about?
Well, once again, it's mythological. These things never even transpired.
But the text doesn't say anything about race. It doesn't mention.
And it doesn't. And we just went over that the text actually doesn't make a distinction of race regarding race.
Well, once again, what books did you read? Because in the book of Enoch, it clearly states that when Noah was born, his parents, Lamech, and his wife, Edna, I believe, were shocked. Okay? Once again, I'm not going to go further into the text, which is why I started my chat. What books did you read for the things that you're saying about the Bible? What books and what do you say? What do you consider the Bible?
So I'm familiar with the book of Enoch, right? I've read the book.
But evidently you didn't know that.
Well, no. Once again, I cite reputable sources. But the book of Enoch, and I know the book that you're referring to, is a book written by someone who was a Hebrew Israelite, right? Who wants to promote the idea and concept that the ancient Hebrews were black. Which was not.
Oh, so you're saying the book of Enoch is a recent book?
I'm talking about. There's a recent book that delves into the pseudo history of this individual. So I'm referring to that text, not what you're referring to.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls is a recent phenomenon. It's a recent book.
So you're saying that you read the Dead Sea Scrolls?
What I'm saying is the Book of Enoch is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was found, and it testifies. Since you mentioned that you can go back in history, there are analysis. There is, it's not just a book, as we talked about earlier when we were referring to what is a book, right? So, in the same way, I can tell you throughout history, geography, and studies from many scholars, further than you and I, who go further than you and I into history, they testify that this book, among many others, which is why I'm asking, what books have you read? When you mentioned Bible,
well, you said they testify that this book, among many others, is what?
Are true. They are not mythology.
It is mythology.
Okay, well, I mean,
there's no way around
I respectfully differ with you on that.
There's no way around that.
And you cannot refute what I've just said.
Wait. I can't refute it. Brother Dwayne, go right ahead.
So my question is, if this is not mythology, how many creation stories are in the Bible? If the Bible is if it's 100% historically accurate, how many creation stories are in there?
How many creation stories? There is only... the Bible refers to itself and the consistent creation story.
So very quickly, we're gonna make this easy. When you answer the question, you need to answer with a number. Are there 1? Are there 7? Are there 12? You need to provide a number. How many creation stories are in the Bible? So we need a number.
Let me answer the question.
So all we need is a number. If someone asks me how many championships did Michael Jordan win, 6. I don't need to provide a narrative. 6. He won 6.
Yeah, but when we're talking about the Bible, you went on and on. So every biblical character have talked about one creation story in the Bible. So what do you say, Brother Omowale?
There's two. There's 2 in the Bible.
And the reason and which ones are those, please?
Genesis. If you read the book of Genesis, there are 2 creation stories. But the reason why I mentioned that is, if this is supposed to be a historical text, why would there be 2 contrary creation stories if this is supposed to be 100% historical?
Please tell me what those 2 creation stories are. You got time. Go ahead.
It's in the book of Genesis. So if you read one of the creation stories, that's the most famous one about Adam and Eve. There's another creation story in which God actually creates man and woman at the same time. And there's nothing in there but Adam and Eve and man being created out of a woman's rib. So these are, and you could check.
Oh, that is you pulling. Woo! Once again.
It's actually in the Bible.
No, it's in the Bible. It's Genesis.
No, but you've misinterpreted the text.
It's not misinterpreted.
It shows.
What is the proper interpretation? And you give me the proper interpretation.
The proper interpretation is that there are accounts in the Bible where one person is talking about the creation story and they give a short version of it instead of the long and detailed version that you may find in Jubilees, for example. I don't think you guys read these books.
I have. I'm telling you, this is not about linked. There's actually one creation story that specifically says God created man and woman at the same time. That's not linked. That's a completely contrary account to.
Well, the short version is that male and female, he created them.
But he didn't create them at the same time in the Adam and Eve story. So how do you confirm this discrepancy if this is a historical text?
It is not a discrepancy. It is that someone comes to you and said, he created men and women. Another person, as they're telling the story, they're like, yeah, he created Adam. And then out of Adam, he put Adam to sleep and then he created Eve.
How did he create man and woman? Was it at the same time or was it man first and woman second?
This is where you have to believe what the book says. And it sounds like
history. If you tell me about belief, I could believe anything.
Yeah,
you can't believe anything, but one thing we cannot do is say when this person tells the story, they said there is Adam and then there is Eve, and then when another person shortened the story, they said he created them male and female. As a matter of fact, even in Genesis, which you said, which you quote, you didn't quote it, you just sort of went over a passage that wasn't correctly interpreted. It's that. It says,
we're talking interpretation, though, because I can interpret things however I want, and this is the problem.
Oh yeah, we can all do that, but one thing we're
talking what the text says, and I'm telling you, the text says that in one story, God created man and woman at the same time. In another story, God creates Adam and then creates Eve. So if this is supposed to be historical and not mythological, why would there even be 2 different accounts of creation, anyways?
What you said here does not, and I just said it, we're just going to go back and forth. What you said does not constitute as 2 different accounts, because one account says he's got Adam, he's got Eve, and then another passage that shortens it says male and female, he created them, right?
It doesn't shorten, though. It actually completely switches up the timeline. That's what I'm telling you.
No, he does not switch
actually, hold on, very quickly. Brother D1, you've been reading the Bible. Could you tap in, be part of the conversation, and maybe you could read verbatim from the biblical text what Brother Dwayne is talking about. Once again, family, if you're watching, of course, LumumSpeaks.com, a Black Empowerment Initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. We're doing a dual stream with Bequaline Network, the Pan-African social media extraordinaire, the home of African Center news and information. We have a riveting conversation, I even argue an evocative conversation regarding deconstructing the Hamitic Curse and its meaning for African people, but Dwayne Omowale. The link is in the chat, family. The link is in the description. I see there are a number of people who are now chiming in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation as well. And I hope that we could continue this robust conversation. But once again, I'm going to put the link in the chat once again. The link is also in the description. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Brother D1 says, give me a few. No problem, brother. Hopefully you'll be able to tap in. So once again, the issue is that... I'm sorry, go right ahead, Brother Dwayne.
From Genesis, okay, let's go to the Exodus story. Who was the Egyptian pharaoh at the time of the Exodus story? If this is a historical account.
Who was the Egyptian pharaoh at the time of the Exodus? Yeah. I mean, many pharaohs. You know, what are you asking me? What exactly are you asking me?
Who was the pharaoh? If the Bible is a historical text, who was the pharaoh at the time of the Exodus story? If this is supposed to be historical.
I'm not gonna get into who was the pharaoh. I know there was one of the pharaohs that was in existence.
Yeah, but if this is a historical text, who is the actual pharaoh?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that.
Hold on. Wait. So, brother, you can either answer the question or you can say, I am unable to answer the question. But what I don't allow people to do on my platform is skip over a question and move the goalpost. So he asked you a very specific question, which was, who was the Egyptian pharaoh during the time of the Exodus story? Are you able to answer that question?
I'm not able to tell you exactly which one it was. I know it was one of the pharaohs. The text says there was a pharaoh. So what are you saying? What's your point, brother?
My point is that it just says it was a pharaoh. It doesn't specifically give the name of the pharaoh. So my point is, if this is a historical text, why wouldn't it actually give the name of the pharaoh? We know later parts of the Bible, pharaohs are actually mentioned by name, and the reason why these pharaohs are mentioned by name is because these texts are referring to historical pharaohs. My point is, you can't name the pharaoh of the Exodus because the Exodus doesn't give a name of that pharaoh because it's not a historical story. It doesn't correspond to any particular point in Egyptian history or in world history. That's why pharaoh in the book of Genesis, not just the pharaoh of the Exodus. When you look at the book of Genesis, it never gives a pharaoh by name because none of these are historical accounts. It's not referring to any specific pharaoh of Egypt.
Right, and let me say this: this isn't just like Brother Dwayne isn't just shooting from the hip here. He's not bloviating. Jewish scholars have even come to these conclusions, have even stated emphatically that the story of course, Jewish enslavement. Brother Jay, make sure you cam up and cue so I can make sure you're not trolling. Got you. Is of course mythological. And the Jewish scholars even argue, and I could quote them verbatim, is that the story of the Exodus was created during the time of King Josiah, when they were leaving exile from Babylon. And this story was created to create a national ethos of pride amongst the Jewish people during that time when they were leaving Babylon and returning to, of course, the land that's disputed as Israel, Palestine, and of course, Canaan.
So how many books of the Bible do you guys subscribe to? The Bible you read, how many books does it have? I'm curious.
Well, one, I don't subscribe to any of it because I know it's mythological. So, I mean, I'm just going to be quite honest with you there.
Okay, well, then we don't need to have a conversation. It's just that when Brother Omowale was talking about the Bible, how many books of the Bible have you read, Brother Omowale? How many books are in your Bible? I guess I should ask.
When you say my Bible, I don't have a personal Bible.
Okay, how many books in the Bible you've researched?
You know, typically most Western churches, they use a Bible that has 66 books, but that's, typical Western churches. I know, I forget the number off the top of my head, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church actually has the largest Bible in terms of the canon.
And I think a great example, if we talk about an African-centered frame of reference for Christianity, or would be, of course, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Kimber Nagast. I've read the Kimber Nagast. I don't know. Have you read the Kimber Nagast, Brother Alex?
No, I have not read the Kimber Nagast, but back to the Ethiopian Bible, it does testify the book of Enoch, which you dismissed. So I don't know where to go from here. But at the end of the day, you don't subscribe to the Bible. You don't subscribe to that history. So really...
Well, once again, brother, it's not history. It's mythology.
Okay. So
I can't allow... I do not allow people to make claims that are patently false on my platform. I don't do that. I've had this platform for about 4 years, maybe 5. I don't allow that.
So everything in the Bible is mythology.
The majority of it is, yes.
I know.
There's some times where they've made some historical claims that could be verifiable. Another issue, and then we're gonna move on to Brother D1 Beast and Brother J. When we talk about, the Bible and of course refuting some of the claims, the first 5 books of the Bible are said to be written by Moses, right? Well, we know that historically that's impossible. That's averse to the facts because the Hebrew language wasn't a written language until the time of King Solomon.
Wow. Okay.
These are historical facts. The Hebrew language was not a written language until the time of King Solomon. So it is impossible for Moses to have written the first 5 books of the Bible when the language wasn't even a written language at the time.
Wow. Those are new claims.
No, actually, this isn't new. I minored in religion in undergrad. This is not new. It may be new for you, but it's not new. It's not new to people who are in the know. Brother D1, what say you? Go right ahead. And then Brother Jay, we're gonna have you tap in because I think you're calling from the UK.
Yeah, I'm just because I was just listening because I'm at work right now, so I'm just popping in real quick.
Okay.
Because I was just listening to what he was saying about the books of the creation, and kind of like when I'm at work, I'm reading the Bible, like in between work and then going and stuff like that. But what he's saying about the story of the creation is pretty clear from like when I'm looking at Genesis right now. Like Adam was created first, then it was Eve, and then afterwards God, or the Israelites God, goes into detail from Adam's birth line going to Noah. So like I just like to respond to what Alex was saying, like come on, like this if you want me to start reading a little bit, but I don't know if you want to start reading.
The second creation story that Brother Dwayne spoke to in the Bible?
I have to go through the pages real quick because it'll take some time. So maybe so if someone wants to go first.
Yeah, we can have Brother Jay speak. Brother Jay, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you just fine.
Right. Okay. Then I mean, if there's creationism in the Bible, then what's the issue? I don't get it. Hello.
Well, so there's a couple of issues. One, we're talking about the fossil. So one, we discussed is that all cultures have their own creation stories. This is reality throughout the world, right? The second issue was, if I could remember correctly, and Brother Dwayne, you could tap in on this if I'm misquoting, was there was a conversation about if this was something that was historically accurate. And Brother Dwayne said, well, if it was historically accurate, then why would there be two separate creation stories in a historical document that contradict themselves?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that, of course, that's nonsensical. That makes no sense whatsoever.
All right.
But what I could comment, and if Dwayne, if he wants to correct me real quick, the second creation story is based on Adam and Eve disobeying God's orders, and then him killing them both and wiping the earth, starting it from scratch. And then I think with Noah from the ark, that's how it started. But give me a second just to confirm that, because I'm trying to read through it and then trying to find the area where it was set. But
if you have it,
but correct me if I'm wrong though.
No, that's correct. But to help you, if you have the Bible on you, I pulled it up here. The first creation story is Genesis 1, verses 21 to 27. So you can pull that up, and that's the original Genesis story. That's the one I was talking about. That mentions God creating. Actually, what it says is that God created the animals of earth first, and then created man and woman. And then when you get to the second creation story, the order is different. God creates Adam, then God creates the creatures of the earth, and then He creates Eve. So, like I said before, if this is supposed to be a historical text and this is not mythology, why would a historical text have two different creation stories that are actually contrary? And as I pointed out, it's not a matter of one story is shortened and the other story is not. The timeline of creation is actually different in both stories in terms of when God creates what.
Right.
But as I pointed out before, it's the same thing with the Exodus story, that there's not a whole lot of historical clarity because these stories are never meant to be historical stories. It's always, my argument is that the understanding was that these stories are actually mythology, that these stories were never meant to be viewed as actual legitimate history, because as I pointed out, if this was supposed to be legitimate history, why would it have two contrary creation stories? So my argument is that the Bible is a collection of Hebrew mythology. Some of it is history. It's not 100% mythology. There's some real historical events real historical figures mentioned in the Bible, but my argument is that the Bible is never meant to be viewed as a historical document. It's a mythological text and it's a religious text.
I will
Can I ask you?
Genesis 1 and Genesis 5 do not contradict each other. That's clear.
Brother Jay, go right ahead, and then Brother LMA, we're gonna have you tap in.
Right. You know, the issue is you know the story of Jesus in the Bible. Are you saying that the character known as Jesus did not exist as a man?
But Brother Jay, we're not talking about Jesus right now. We're talking about the creation story.
Oh, my apologies for deviating the topic. So it's the whole creation story of the timeline. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, but Jesus did confirm the creation story.
Oh,
Which one?
okay.
Which one?
When he
Okay,
said,
I think I got it. If you're
Okay, just very quickly, Brother D1, Brother Alex, you said Jesus confirmed the creation story. Which one did he confirm?
well, when he said male and female, he created them. Have you not read? Because when the Pharisees try to test him in the sense of saying that about marriage, right? And he uses that creation story in Genesis 5, as a matter of fact, which Brother
Genesis 5?
Omowale
For
talks
Genesis
about.
5? There's a creation story in Genesis
Stories in
chapter
Genesis
5?
1 and 2, not 5.
Not 5.
Okay, if you read Genesis 5, it restates the creation story, which is what I said earlier about when he said male and female, he created them.
That wasn't the argument, though. The argument wasn't that he created male and female. The argument was one story has God creating male and female at the same time. The other story has God creating Adam and then creating Eve out of Adam's rib.
And that is my response to your question, in the sense that it is not two different stories; it is one story.
Okay, well, so, but Brother Alex, hold on. This is where I get control, family. Brother Alex, you're being disingenuous. There's no way around that. You're being disingenuous. That would be tantamount to me saying, and on one video, my son, who is my oldest child, was born first, then my daughter was born second, which is the case, and then in another saying that they were twins and they were born at the same time, which is, those are two contradictory statements. But Brother D1, we're going to go to you, and then Brother LMA, we're going to allow you to speak as well, and you've been waiting patiently, and we greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say this real quick because this is like the precursor to the second creation, because before the flood comes. So basically in Genesis 6, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and every inclination and thoughts of human heart was evil all the time. The God regretted that he made all human beings, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and then the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So that's what I'm saying. That's what they're referring to, the second creation. Because the next paragraph goes into the flood that's about to happen with Noah and stuff like that. So yeah, that's why I just wanted to just contribute that real quick. Yeah.
Because you read the second creation story that's in chapter 2. That's what we're asking for. So if you could bring that up, Brother LMA, go right ahead.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
We hear you just fine.
Yeah, so I'm going back to the original topic about, and I was listening to the beginning portion of 2 times speed, so I kind of lost a little bit when you were talking about the curse of Ham, and basically it's not all of his children. There was no talk about whether or not the characteristics of, generally African people. So my question is I guess I have one question when it comes to just the Abrahamic biblical world. I guess you guys heard of the whole thing that Moses was African and Jesus was African. Do you think that, do you think it's true? Because one, I'm a, like I said, I'm a non-believer. I'm an atheist as well. So I really don't want to give this any credence. But so the story of Moses, right? Moses being put into the basket in the Nile River, and then the basket floats to Egypt. Is that correct? It's been a while since I listened to the story, but is that kind of jive? Right. So I was looking it up, and it says that since the Nile River flows north, Moses would have to be south of Egypt in order for the basket to go through.
Well, so I can clean it up for you rather quickly. The story is based on on rooted in the fact that Jewish people were enslaved in ancient Kemet. That in itself is a historical.
Right.
So the basis of the story is there.
Right. I'm not saying it's true or not, but I'm saying that if it, from their standpoint, if Moses was placed in a basket south of Egypt or Kemet at the time, then it would, I would, think that, okay, maybe Moses would have been a dark-skinned African if, Egypt at that time or Kemet at that time was majority African or dark-skinned African, that Moses would then be dark-skinned African. I mean, like I said, I'm no, archaeologist, so I can't, tell you one way or another, but I can just pose the question and have you guys, give me your thoughts on it.
So here's what I can say about that. Based on the biblical text, it gives the implication that Moses wasn't a dark African because it mentions he marries an Ethiopian woman, and some of the Hebrews had an issue with the fact that he married an Ethiopian woman. Now, my argument is, if Moses and the rest of the Hebrews were dark-skinned Africans, why would any of them take issue with Moses marrying an African woman?
Great point.
That's a great point. Can you repeat that again?
Brother LMA, we get a lot of feedback from your mic. Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback. Don't know why that's the case. Hopefully, you'll be able to clean it up.
Okay.
Yes, so to repeat what I said, it's in the Bible. It mentions that Moses had married an Ethiopian woman. And my argument is that if Moses and the Hebrews were dark-skinned Africans, why would some of the Hebrews have an issue with Moses marrying an Ethiopian woman if they were all Africans?
Could it be a tribal issue, perhaps? Tribal issue? Because, like, if you go to a place like Somalia, you have, tribal beefs between different clans. So that could be an answer, perhaps?
The reason why I say it's not, because when you look at this region of Africa where these stories take place, Kemet and Nubia particularly, that these intermarriages happened all the time between the Egyptians and the Nubians, and it was never an issue to the point where one of the dynasties of Egypt, actually the 12th dynasty, the founder of the dynasty was a child of an Egyptian father and a Nubian mother. So these type of cross marriages between these different groups in the region happened all the time. So, I mean, my argument there is that the scripture really doesn't give much of an indication as to why it would have been an issue, but it certainly couldn't have been like a tribalistic type of thing, because these type of intermarriages were happening all the time among Africans in the region. So my argument is that the implication of the story would have been that the Hebrews were not African and did not see themselves as such, which is why some of them had an issue with Moses marrying an African woman.
And is that a European translation or interpretation of the Bible you're reading from there, Brother Omowale?
I mean, when you say European interpretation, I'm not sure what you mean. It's not a European text, it's a Hebrew text. I mean, obviously it's translated into English, but I mean, do you read Hebrew to read the original text? I certainly don't. So I have to go off of English translations, but it's not a European text. It's a translation of a Hebrew text.
Well, the reason why I ask you that is because that's the way what you've described in your line of question in its interpretation or deduced interpretation. It's what we get from the European when they talk about that passage. But in reality, the passage...
Hold on. How did you get that from the European?
Well, because the Europeans, they were talking about that the Hebrews were not African. So therefore, since they were not African, they
where are you getting that from? Because I mean, Jewish people never claimed to be African.
Well, here's the thing: Jewish people never claimed. We mentioned the Kibud Nagas before. The Ethiopians also made the point that the Hebrews weren't African. In the Kibud Nagas, the Ethiopians make a very clear distinction between themselves and the Jews.
So that's not a European thing.
Lumumba, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll be back up here in a moment. Are you going to still be on, brother?
Yes, we'll still be on. Because you're in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm in the UK.
Okay, and what time is it over there? Is it like 6 or 7?
It's 20 minutes to 7.
Okay, very good. Yeah, we should be on probably another 30 minutes.
All right, thanks a lot, sir.
All right. Brother LMA, were you able to get the mic check 1 2 1 2? Brother LMA. Hope you were able to square the mic away there. But yeah, it's not a European perspective or interpretation, brother Alex.
Sorry, I stepped away. Are you guys? Did you say something?
Yeah. What I was out speaking to Brother LMA.
Okay.
So Brother LMA, okay, he said he has to drop out as his audio is not working. Hopefully he could get that squared away and then come back. But yeah, I was just saying that's not a European perspective.
Well, the thing is,
you find even African people,
Moses,
in terms of the Kebra Nagas, making a very clear distinction between themselves of African people and, of course, Jewish or Hebrew people.
Well,
so this is not a European perspective, brother.
Well, the so many other texts, books, and even in the Bible itself talks about Moses marrying a Cushite woman. Cushite or Midianite woman.
And they took issue with that, as Brother Dwayne just spoke to.
Right, because they were not part of the same ethnicity. That was an ethnic issue.
So why didn't Egyptians have issues with Egyptian pharaohs marrying Nubian women then? If marrying outside your ethnicity was such an issue in this part of Africa, why did Egyptians and Nubians do it very frequently?
Ethnic tribe, different groups, different clans of people. They all had issues with each other.
But I'm saying in this region of Africa, the Egyptians and Nubians weren't viewed as being so separate that it would have been an issue for an Egyptian to marry a Nubian.
Well, you know what? I'm gonna defer back to you on that because you're the African expert. Since my only claim is that the Hebrews were Africans. So you, in terms of intra-African affairs, I'm gonna let you handle that one.
But I mean, if you're claiming the Hebrews were African, then this is also part of intra-African affairs. And my point is that the Hebrews were not African. I mean, the text itself doesn't actually even give any indication that the Hebrews were, in fact, African.
Well, the reason why I make that claim is because I say the Middle East, what we know as the Middle East, is Northeast Africa, but
it is not.
Okay, well there you go.
It's not. Once again, I told you, I can't allow people to come on my platform and make claims that are patently false because it hurts my credibility, brother. It hurts my credibility. It hurts my credibility as a scholar, as a professional, as an academic, if I allow people to come on my platform and make claims that are patently false. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to be didactic. I'm not seeking to act like I'm a know-it-all because I'm not. I always prefer to Brother Dwayne when it comes to issues of history, right?
But you also say that you don't subscribe to the Bible, so that's why I'm like, I don't even.
Once again, hold on. That's a religious issue. We're talking a historical issue, right? And here's the issue. I know people who are Christians. We're talking about saved, sanctified.
I'm not a Christian.
I never said you were. What I'm saying is I know people who are Christians who are saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost filled, and fire baptized, and even they are able to say, yes, these people weren't African. This is something this doesn't add up. For example, I gave an example. I was talking to my uncle who's a Christian, and we were talking about how in the Bible, of course, according to the book of Isaiah and the book of Ezekiel, it was prophesied that Jesus, the Messiah, would be a descendant of King David. And I spoke with my uncle about how, but that's when you really uncover that, when you deconstruct that, it doesn't. It doesn't have any bearing because in the Bible there are two lineages that are given of Jesus. And in both they trace Jesus' lineage through Joseph, who isn't his biological father, and you can't trace your lineage through a non-biological parent. And my uncle was like, "You're absolutely right. Right? It doesn't matter if I believe Jesus, and you can't trace your lineage through a non-biological parent. For example, let's say Brother Dwayne." This is a colorful example, adopted my son, right? But my son could not trace his lineage through Dwayne. He would still have to trace his lineage through what? Bakari. That's a reality. So there are just claims that are patently false. And there are two different lineages, right? In the book of Matthew, in the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Luke. And in both, they name a different person as Joseph's father. So once again, this is another example of the Bible contradicting itself. There's no way around this. This is not an issue of interpretation. It actually states that in the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph's father is this person, and the Gospel of Luke says Joseph's father is another person.
So as with other books that may have errors and contradictions in parts of them. So is that one of the reasons why you don't consider the Bible as a historical book?
Well, it's not. I don't consider it a historical book because it's not a historical book. I
Okay.
mean,
Well,
if you ever take a history class, we're talking about secondary, even post-secondary, you're not going to use the Bible as a historical reference because it's not a historical text.
right.
That's just a reality. You ask any scholar, any reputable scholar of religion, of history, they would tell you we can't use that book as a historical text because it is not a historical text. Keyword is reputable. We're not talking about some jackleg on the street. We're not talking about some liquor store scholar. We're talking about a reputable source of information. Someone who actually has gone to college, someone's gone to university and knows how to do rigorous historical study and research. And they will come and you could come back to me, and if they tell you no, it is a historical text, and this person is a reputable scholar, you can bring them on my platform.
Yeah, what I do realize that we have to read the books, which is how I started. That was my first statement in the chat as to which books of the Bible and how many books are contained therein, as to why those references to the Bible will be made by Brother Omowale. And I'll end my plane there.
Very good. Brother Dwayne, yeah. And so, yeah, the second, Brother Dwayne, the second narrative is in chapter 2. I believe it's verse 4 through 25. So just want to clear that up. The second actual creation story, chapter 2, verse 4 through verse 25. So, and that is where Brother Dwayne, of course, shared that it states that man and woman were made at the same time, rather than man being made first and then the woman being made from, of course, Adam's rib. So just wanted to clear that up there. It's not chapter 7, Brother D1, but chapter 2, verse 4 through verse 25. Anything else before we close out? Any final thoughts from Brother Dwayne?
I think it's been a very lively discussion, but it goes back to the point that I made earlier about how it's important to address these topics because so many of our people really have this view that the Hebrews were an African people, and just historically, culturally, that was not the case. But the problem with that is people who have that view and then try to focus our history as being the history of the Hebrew Israelites. To me, it actually takes away from legitimate African history. From the history.
You actually overlook actual African history. Yeah.
So that's the issue, though, because we didn't really get into too much in the show. But when you read the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, much of the narrative is actually very negative in terms of what it has to say about African people, particularly Egypt, particularly Nubia. So again, if your only source of history of African people comes from the Bible, you're getting a very skewed historical perspective, and one that in many cases is actually very negative, unfairly negative towards African people. So I think that's why, as we spoke about before, it's important to really address these issues, and important to make the point be known that as a people, we do have an actual history, we do have an actual culture that's outside of the Abrahamic cultural tradition. And too often when our people get so wrapped up in that tradition that they become alienated from our culture and tradition, they essentially become anti-African many times without even being aware of how anti-African they are.
Absolutely. So yeah, family, appreciate you all tapping in. We're also going to be posting information, of course, on the channel regarding water filters to Togo. So I want to make sure that you definitely support, that initiative that we're engaging in. We know that part of the work that we do as African people, as people who ascribe to the ideology and movement known as Pan-Africanism, is to seek to improve the material conditions of African people. So I will be consistently pushing this initiative that, of course, Brother Dwayne is working with one of the local brothers in the community of Central Florida to make sure that we address. And if there are any other issues that you are aware of that you would like to promote on our platform where we are addressing the material conditions of our people, please give us a shout out and we'll make sure to promote that information on the platform. Until next time, family, y'all know what to do. Make sure you always bet on Black. Peace.